Please join me in welcoming Daniel Wyleczuk-Stern and Matt Southworth.
Hi, I'm Matt. I work on the security team at Priceline, the online travel company. And you may or may not know, Priceline's a pretty small company, which means we have an extremely powerful, but also pretty small security team. Sort of definitionally, we're all generalists. And that means we skew more blue than red. Of course, we see the value in adversarial testing, but we had some problems with your sort of, rinse and repeat third-party red team or Pentest. For the last year, we've been doing purple team simulations with Praetorian, and we found that to be a super successful way to work together to level up both teams. And the purple teams that we run are structured around the MITRE attack framework. Also, Priceline is part of a holding company. We own Kayak, Booking.com, OpenTable, and I've seen the outcome of similar purple team operations repeated at all of those brands. And so we've learned more from what they've done and what they've brought to it. Just to be definitional for us, when I say a purple team, I mean third-party adversaries working with my in-house defenders for about a week, working through what we can and can't do. And that's the point of this talk, is what went well in those exercises, where have we improved, and what are we going to do next?
And I'm Daniel. I'm a practice manager with Praetorian. I've helped grow and build our purple team service line over the past year and a half, 2 years now. So we'll get into it. So what are the problems that we were seeing that initially led us to get into the purple teaming space? Security spend has gone up astronomically, especially in the detection space. However, in terms of metrics, in terms of how you can track your improvements over time, prior to attack, we weren't necessarily seeing sort of strong ways to measure how well that spend was resulting in increases in your detection. The other thing that we were seeing is sort of that red-blue confrontation. Oftentimes, these two teams have differing metrics that drive their success, often ones that are opposed to each other. So, impossible to share information, and these teams are not working together to solve the true problem, which is improving their security. So what were some of the symptoms we were seeing with that? Just in general, failures to detect us on red teams. Operators would make mistakes, and we're like, uh-oh, we're burned. But they just wouldn't get detected. Or we would just do a traditional penetration test, and we'd have these awkward discussions where they would catch us on something and say, well, make sure you note our strong detection. And we would get into a whole bunch of what-ifs where we realized they were doing a substitution, where they were trying to answer a hard question, how good is our detection, with an easier question, which is, did we catch this pen test?
And I often said those things, right? Make sure you note in your report our strong detection, so when my boss reads it, he knows we're not complete fools. But I think we had some of the same problems with red teaming. One of the things that frustrated me the most was repeat findings, test over test. Tomcat or a JBoss server with default credentials, I feel like there's always one sitting out there on my network. And I think part of the reason we had those repeat findings is because the red team would run, they'd take a week to write a report, they'd send the report over to us, we'd read through it. By that time, it's been a month, and our logs have rolled, and our memories have gotten stale, and we're not sure, did we see this? Could we have alerted on this, right? Do we have the right telemetry? That loop was just taking too long to feed back into my team to do something actionable with the tests that we wanted to do.
So this is our slide, sort of why did we end up choosing attack? We can move into this one. It provided a repeatable process. So when we were doing a purple team previously before attack, we would just sort of base it off of what we thought was a good thing. But with attack, we were able to establish repeatable processes and clear definitions from iteration to iteration. Also, it's aligned with industry, so we're able to communicate standards clearly, not just with Priceline, but across a number of our other clients and customers as well. And that helps provide a layer of defensibility for why we test things and what our conclusions are. And also allows us to show improvements or sometimes things getting worse over time. And provide metrics that are strategic, sometimes tactics or data sources that we've been talking about, or down to individual procedures and provide recommendations there.
Yeah, as part of that holding company, we're very competitive with the Kayak security team, with the OpenTable security team. Hi, Frank. And we want to see how our coverage maps to theirs. We've taken findings from these with the idea of going to the vendors and saying, we bought this product from you, we feel like you should cover these specific TTPs. here's something that can trigger it, why aren't you helping us here? And we function a lot by dashboards, by burn down lists, right? And having done these exercises 3 times, we know what we want to do, what we want to get to, and it's easy for us to visualize that and show bite-sized forward progress to our team and our leadership.
So what are our objectives during these purple teams? We have 4 key ones. The first is to improve detection capabilities through the targeted emulation. And the key word I want to draw out there is improve. Our goal during these exercises is to leave the environment better than we found it. Because it's red and blue working together, there's a huge opportunity to not just do an assessment, but actually move the needle on security and say, you were here before, we taught you something, we built some alerts, we made some alerts better, we reduced false positives, and truly leave the place better than we found it. And then collect metrics as well, so that the organization understands where they stand in terms of their ability to detect, what data sources they're logging, what solutions are performing well or not performing well.
Yeah, our first round was mostly covering telemetry, which has been talked about a lot in the last 2 days, but really do we have the right coverage? And as we progress through doing these, right, we've been able to develop both the tactical and the strategic recommendations for our team that some we came up with ourselves, some we asked Daniel for, that really helps us set a roadmap for 16, 18 months.
There are a number of constraints. So we're doing these over about a week, 2 people on our team, the folks at Priceline or other clients. So we run into some areas where we just can't or won't test certain things. The first one is time. So it's just a week. There's some TTPs where maybe it takes too long to set up, or it just isn't necessarily reasonable to do it over that time. So pop quiz T1030 is the data transfer size limits. So that's where an adversary will break up huge chunks of data into small chunks over a period of time. If we're only doing it a week, we may not necessarily hit the sensors that would trigger that. So instead of testing it, we can just have those conversations.
Yeah, and we think in terms of threat families, which are sort of an amalgamation of a threat actor and a technique, and we prioritize those that are in e-commerce, online travel. And T1205, port knocking, is not something we prioritize, right? So when we put thought into it before we run these, we know what we want to test, we know what we want to leave to the side.
And then capability. This covers sort of a number of different areas. There's ones where we just probably aren't allowed to test. So DC Shadow, T1207, it's kind of unusual to have a vendor show up and you give them domain admin to your network, unless they go and get it themselves. So we've also found that showing up and saying, hey, we'd like a DA account, sometimes sets the wrong tone. So being communicative about that open and say, here's our limitations with the access provision to us, we may not be able to test those, here's how you can go do it yourself, helps set a more collaborative communication tone for the rest of the engagement. Then also just technical capabilities. We're not going to try and break into a factory to insert malicious chips, so we may not necessarily test some of those initial access ones that require a bit more effort there.
Yeah, I think the most important thing here around capabilities is to know on our side when we should leave something for later. We just don't have the telemetry. We're not going to add it this week. Set it aside. We'll pick it up later.
Yeah, on that note, if you find that they can't detect something, don't beat them over the head with it. If there's a data source missing, there's really no point in continuing to test that specific area. So from our outsider perspective, there's sort of 3 areas that we found made us successful. Cooperation is key. Our very first purple team, we sat in a room all by ourselves and tested for a week, and Matt hated it. So what's important there is also we failed and we learned from that. We talked and said what went right, what went wrong, and we were able to improve on future iterations and talk to people and say, what did you not like about this? How can we improve? Prioritizing accordingly. So understand what's hard for you to execute, what's hard to fix, and get client input, and have that drive your testing strategy in terms of which TTPs you're going to go through first, and where do you then decide where you're going to focus breadth, where do you want coverage across certain tactics or data sources, or where do you want depth with things where credential dumping or things where there's now more sub-techniques, we want to really drive into some of the more detailed and esoteric procedures. So in order to support this, we built some automation. I want to give some shout outs to a lot of the other folks who have done some great work here. Why did we choose Metasploit? We wanted to alert on the behavior, not the tool. Metasploit provides a huge number of extensions, a lot of capability to work with APIs, where we were really able to drill down into what is actually the technique about. There were some other implementations, for instance, credential dumping, where we'd run a PowerShell command to get a PS script from the web, and then invoke that script. And we were seeing that that was actually alerting on the PowerShell being downloaded and not the credential dumping. And we didn't really want that. We wanted the behavior we were after. It integrates with a lot of other tools, PowerShell, .NET in memory. You can do a whole bunch of cool things there. clear standards, and then support across a variety of operating systems, so Linux and Mac as well. So why should you not use Metasploit? Whitelisting the payloads can be pretty hard. It's Metasploit. A lot of EDRs really don't like when you run it on the system, even if it is whitelisted. We ran into a situation where when it's loading certain extensions, even though the binary itself is whitelisted, the way it reflectively loads those DLLs in memory, the EDR did not really like how that was being done. So we had to work with our partner there to do some stuff manually. Deployment isn't easy, so there's others, enterprise solutions which really make this easy. Metasploit doesn't. Some things can be pretty hard to customize, especially with C2. And if you're not familiar with it, there's a bit of a retention curve.
Yeah, as a defender, right, I had training in Metasploit at DerbyCon 1, which was many years ago, and I might touch it twice a year since, and it's really hard to pick that back up. And although they've written some great automation that they can leave around their environment, no one on my team is an expert at running this, right? And we need to think about if we want to spend time on that or, bring in a third party to run it for us.
So this is a couple of the modules that we have written for Windows. I do want to give a huge shout out to the other teams that we've incorporated their work. Atomic Red Team, SpectreOps, MITRE, Endgame, and a number of others which we tried to make sure we credited in each of these modules. So this is a bit of an eye chart, but essentially what it's showing is that you can customize the modules, the commands. We wanted to make sure there was a clear standard across the tactics so that when you run a persistence module, it does the same thing, and you don't necessarily, as an operator, have to think, what did this thing do again? So we tried to communicate those standards. So persistence will spawn calc and write some data and timestamps to a certain file. And then that's showing it running. I also want to give a shout out to Detection Lab from Chris Long. We do a lot of our development and testing in there. It makes it really easy to spin up a Windows domain with a lot of tools and really be able to test our alerts and our automation really, really quickly. So take a look at that project if you haven't. This is another example. We were testing process injection, and due to the tools that were configured, we weren't able to get the telemetry that we were looking for.
I had a great conversation Monday evening here with someone from a bank whose detection team has 12 people. We don't have a detection team like that. We don't have a SOC, and I don't think we want a SOC. I would rather have a team of engineers who have some sort of shared accountability around the detections we create and respond to. Because of that, we're pretty disciplined and fanatical about writing really good alerts and having a strong standard about how we produce and action those. Almost all of our telemetry flows through Splunk, and all of that fires into a Slack channel. This is awesome because it's eye-catching. Half the stuff we can respond to on our phones. We don't have to be in the office. And every alert we have will link to a query and or a playbook that'll show us exactly what's going on. We also keep all of these in a big list, right? And all of those are taxonomized by attack. So every detection we have, if it links to a TTP, that's in the spreadsheet, and someone who's looking at it who maybe hasn't seen this alert before or doesn't know why we wrote it originally, instantly has some context about what it is, why it was created, and who wrote it. Also, a lot of these alerts we've created through the Purple Team process, and what's interesting there is we don't know who wrote this. It could have been a red teamer who wrote the report, and that's what's most valuable to us, is the people who are doing the damage, right, understand what we see on our side, whether we have the logging or not, and as Daniel said, are leaving it better than they found it. I've used this line on my boss a few times, right? My job is so hard because we have to do everything perfectly and then you never hear from me. The attackers only have to get it right once and then it's game over. That's kind of a lie. I don't think he's watching. But what we found is not only do attackers only have to get it wrong once, but in our environment at least, attackers make mistakes. And much of our telemetry or our detections is based around finding those mistakes. If you did something perfect the first time, we may not fire on it, but as the attackers are enumerating and feeling through the network, that's a gold mine of TTPs that we can alert on.
So how does this play into the Purple Team testing? We can use our cooperation with Matt and his team to understand what their environment looks like, where their data sources are, and help prioritize and focus on nodes where there's perhaps a gathering of TTPs that form a chain as part of their attack path. So we've been trying to think with chains a little bit more and sort of graph out how do these techniques flow into each other. There's been some great work by other folks in this conference as well, where they've talked about how other attacks can facilitate, lead, or cause other TTPs. So by grouping these in certain areas, we can understand how do we sort of either increase the weight of certain areas by making it harder to exploit these nodes or make it easier to detect, or remove them altogether by instituting protections that just would eliminate them from the graph altogether.
Yeah, our internal term for this is attack path mapping, which really is just taking it through the environment. How do you get to the crown jewels?
So there are some areas where we realize that attack is not enough. So I want to touch on them just a little bit. Cloud was on that list, but in the latest release, there was some stuff added there. Some areas like software as a service applications maybe don't necessarily fit cleanly. Internal APIs, we've seen some weirdness where applications are talking with other applications internally, and our clients are curious about, well, how would we detect something malicious using this API? Or some TTPs where prior to sub-techniques, it may just be too broad for us to necessarily give just one score or focus on just one part of that, such as database access or other areas like that. So what are our solutions when we run into these problems where something doesn't fit cleanly into our model and our plan? The first one is just talk, communicate, explain to Matt and understand from his team what's important to them, what are our limitations, how do we dive into these areas more or less. And then internal communication from our team as well, where we're talking and thinking, how can we really test these things? And then technical breadth. So we've brought in our web app folks when Matt had some questions about how you detect mage card attacks, and really thinking outside of just your red team, outside of your blue team, and bringing in folks from all sorts of areas and skills.
Yeah, so a couple things that, at least when we put these slides together, weren't reflected in attack, just very specific and actionable alerts from my team. 2FA bypass, right? Changes in our GCP org. These are just simple detections that are high value for us, that came through creative thinking during the purple team that wouldn't have spawned if we were maniacally focused on coverage of attack TTPs.
So how do we actually deliver value out of these? What's sort of the end goal? Our current report format is Excel, so I think that's a shot for some folks. So why did we choose to do that? We found that trying to put this huge matrix into a PDF just was terrible. It really makes it really easy to view as a quick dashboard. And most importantly for us, because we're a third party, these things are being shared across organizations. So having something that you host or some sort of internal web app didn't really work. We wanted something that was easy to use, easy to share, and easy to communicate, not just at the technical level where you can drill into the TTPs, but also do strategic recommendations. And I can show templates after this if people are curious. And also the other thing I want to put on there is tickets. As part of our sort of theme of making the environment better, sometimes you can deliver this report, but if you see an issue and you're working with the client and want to just put in a ticket in their system, Jira, ServiceNow, what have you, work with them and get that access and document what you did, and so they have all the information there so they can build out the alerts in their ticketing system.
Yeah, we've gone through an exercise where either they create the tickets for us or they hand us a CSV and we create all of those tickets. It's been great. At that point, the tickets are even taxonomized for us, so we can go back and see which TTP they were covering. So what have we learned and what did we get out of working with the purple teams? I think the first thing to remember is this is not a red team, this is not a pen test, and although we're bringing in a third party, we should contribute as much resourcing and do just as much work. The prep work is extremely important. We've learned that over 3 iterations. The basics, getting stuff ready in advance, but also knowing what you want to get out of it. And bringing your cats and your flexible cats is extremely important to the work, because what you think you're going to do on Tuesday may or may not work out. It's great to be able to drop something and move on. So diving into a couple of those things, what was most important to us was communication. A month before the purple team, we start publicizing it to the tech teams, right? In the weekly operations meeting, we say this is coming up. We let people know what we plan to test. We let people know where we will be physically so that they can drop in and see what's happening. We set up a comms channel with the team. We make sure they've got their accounts set up before they show up. We agree to a rhythm of communications, of stand-ups, and everything else. It's just so much better to have that ready when the constraint, the 1 week of red teamers we have, walk into the environment. We think about what we think we will want to cover, what we think we will want to test, what we know we want to ignore, either based on what we know from our CTI or what we've seen in the environment in the past. We make some assumptions about what tools are going to cover which TTPs. We make sure that the purple team have access to those tools, and we put those through the test. And more than anything else, it's that communication, right? It's talking to everyone in the org, not just the security team. Let them know what's happening. Let them know why. Let them know if there's an interruption in service, where to come and yell at me. So the way I described it across our org is this is like a pen test that we want to succeed. When we do our PCI testing, I want no findings on that report because why would I? In this case, I want all of the findings, right? I want to know everything that could possibly be wrong so that we can prioritize it and fix it on our own timeline with our own prioritization. The most recent purple team we did a few weeks ago, a new person had just joined my team that week. And this was fantastic onboarding for them because they had immediate access to our tools. They saw the detections that worked and did not work. And they learned a ton from the adversarial testers and from our own team about what we prioritize in our environment. When we are done with the week, we expect to have more detections, more findings, and more test cases, taxonomized against attack, that we can keep and run in the environment. Oh, you can keep going. So we finished the assessment. We finished 3 assessments. What do we want to do next steps? The very first thing to do when the assessment closes is to start thinking about the next one. Your memory will never be fresher than just when it's done. So start sketching out what TTPs did we lack, what telemetry did we lack, what do we want to make sure we have covered when they come back in 3 months. We're huge on taxonomizing in Jira, right? I'll show you how that works. Make sure that what we already have is still working. Repeat tests, some of them are revalidation, the existing detections we have. And we expect when we're done to have new stuff to hand to our vendors to say, this worked, this didn't work. How can you help us get better? Strategically, we've used the purple teaming to reprioritize what we're going to do, especially the first round. I was a little skeptical about command history. When I saw how many places that lit up, it was something we reprioritized and brought into our SIM much more rapidly.
And then when it comes to the strategic improvements, when you're building these reports and recommendations, again, have a dialogue. You don't want to recommend something that they tried and failed and shut down, or if they did try and fail it, understand why. Maybe you understand pain points of why that failed and how you can help them succeed in those areas, or help them reprioritize certain things that could potentially close off a whole attack vector or a whole tactic, such as lateral movement if you move to like private VLANs.
So I mentioned we were fanatical about alerting and having great hygiene in the alerting. We do the same with the findings out of the purple team. You don't need to see my Jira, but rest assured that every finding in there, right, is taxonomized against attack. It's something that we can track with a burn down chart. We know where we are. We know where we want to be at the end of the sprint, at the end of the quarter.
And then align the alerts with attacks. So Priceline currently uses spreadsheets in order to help keep track of what alert corresponds to what. But then align that back to attack or not Excel, Google Sheets I think sometimes, can help track and facilitate quick actions and reviews on their team. There's also other solutions, so Hunter's Forge, the Red Hunter's Playbook, we're big fans of as well. So what are our final tips for success? Checklists, make sure you request what you need. They help facilitate the quick communication and parlaying of information and accounts on both sides so that when you get there day one, you can maximize your value and you're not getting spun up for a whole 8 or 9 hours. Sharing, so you don't want to silo this information. If the testers are working, have them share whatever information or logs they're using with the client or the blue team so that they can see these things in real time and it's not a surprise at the end what happened. And then planning. So no plan survives first contact, right? But having that plan and understanding what you think you would test would allow you to deviate from that in a useful and deliberate way. And then defining the objectives. So understand your adversarial thought and what you hope to get out of the test.
Yeah, for us, the most important outcome is more communication and understanding within our team and between us and the other tech stakeholders. We want to make sure they know what's happening, they know where we are, and they can come find us. Something that I really like to get out of the purple teaming, either that my own team will develop or Daniel's, is sort of quick hit demos. These are super powerful when working with other tech teams, right? Just demonstrating, here's a count enumeration against Exchange. It's something that, for whatever reason, you'll get your ticket resolved, you'll get the finding cleaned up 10 times more quickly if you can show someone a real-time demo.
And then again, as we highlighted, the team diversity. So bringing in folks from all areas of the internal side as well as external, so you can really hit a lot of areas. All right.
That's us.
Thank you.